What's your, oh, you're not joking moment? One of my best friends' family took in a kid from Sierra Leone in high school for his final year. He actually had family here that he was living with, but they just decided to up and move to Florida, and he didn't want to change schools. He also has been in the US way longer than he ever let on. Whatever. Well, they welcomed him as a family in the Christmas pictures and all. Flash forward 3 years later, and their other kids have since moved out and are away at college. He's still there, rent free. He's also a longtime dating an Indian girl from our high school whose parents disowned her. He ends up getting a different girl pregnant, then follows her out to Ohio. The Indian girlfriend follows him out there, where she finishes her degree and gets a great job. They then have 2 kids of their own. As all of this is going on, he hits my friend up only when he needs money. It's constant. It's always for some scheme or venture, and it always 100% sounds like a scam. Sometimes it's just to cover bills or for the other kids' clothes. At one point, he's prompting Jamaican artists and gets bunched up while throwing a show in Philly with a bunch of contacts. He calls my friend to meet up at a restaurant in a crappy area of town, and basically what proceeds is a shakedown for $5,000. Then it's a club/wedding venue he opened in Ohio just before the lockdown. He'd come visit us in Philly, and the kid was personable as hell. He'd spin you these stories about growing up in war-torn Sierra Leone, all which sounded like BS, especially because the timing never matched up when he was over here. He'd pivot to asking me for advance money to write a book about his life, or for us to go with him to Sierra Leone to see his hometown. Then he starts showing me pictures of his life in Ohio. They've got a big house and 2 cars, one a Mercedes. They're looking to buy a second property now. My friend, probably out $30,000 to him. Has he seen a penny back? Nope. Does a guy call my friend's family? Never. He's like the modern day version of the guest who never leaves, except he upgraded to a Mercedes? Story 2. I work at a hotel. We have this regular who comes in but usually makes reservations ahead of time, and she has her favorite room she tries to get. Well, one day she walked in asking for a room. I had rooms available, but not the one she wanted, and she replied, "Oh, call the guests in that room and tell them to move out so I can have it." I seriously thought that was a joke, and I played along saying, "I'll get right on that," as I was getting her info on the computer. All of a sudden, she said, "Aren't you going to call them?" "Call who?" "Those guests in that room so I can have it." "Oh, you really weren't joking." I told her that we don't do that. If she wanted that room, she needed to call ahead. I have a room. I know it's not your preferred room, but it's all I've got, and you can take it or leave it, but I'm not moving a guest out. She seemed almost taken aback by that, but I told her that if she didn't take the room I had, she wouldn't get anything. She calls ahead now, but I was mortified and shocked she actually tried this stunt and actually meant it. Story 3. Working in a catalog store in the UK, you pick from a catalog and we bring it out from the warehouse. Lady comes in and orders the single largest thing we keep in store, a shed. Not a particularly big shed as sheds go, but still a shed. "Okay, madam, if you give me your vehicle's registration number, I'll tell the security guys to let you around the back of the store, park in Bay 5, and we'll load it for you." What are you talking about?" "You have to park around back so you can load it into your vehicle." "I don't have a vehicle." "Oh, well, we have the numbers for some white van men and taxi services if you'd like to." "No, just bring it up. Keith can carry it." She indicates a portly man of around 50 across the room. He waves. Madam, it is a building, and with all due respect to your husband, he absolutely cannot carry it by himself." She started getting angry, demanded that we bring the shed out to her, so we did so. It took 3 guys to even lift it. We got it into the lift diagonally, though it trapped the man behind it, and when it came up, she said, "What on earth is that?" "That's your shed, madam." "My Keith can't carry that." "Yeah, no crap. Would you like me to call a van service for you?" She actually just got a refund and left. Story 4. Had a neighbor who was a single guy in his 40s, divorced, had a college-age daughter that stayed with him half the time. Seemed like they were having a sort of family reunion one weekend, and I saw him talking with others out on his back deck. A while later, I went over to ask to borrow something. His daughter answered, and I asked her if her dad was there. She said her dad was gone, and I just chuckled and was like, haha, yeah, right. She just looked at me and turned around crying and went back inside. Her mom, his ex-wife, came out right away and saw I was confused, shocked, and very apologetic. She was really nice about it, saying it just had happened and was the first time the daughter had to answer the door. Apparently, he had ended it all. I obviously felt so terrible and apologized profusely. I thought for sure I'd just seen him, and the way the daughter had announced it seemed almost lighthearted. Turns out who I saw on the back deck was his brother, who looked a lot like him, and all the family was there for the funeral. Story 5. Context: I work in telecom, memorizing measurements and clearances is very important for my job. I was 22 at the time this happened. My coworker doing my training was 51. My coworker is quizzing me on some basic training material and asks, "How far does A have to be from B?" I tell him, 1 foot. He looks at me and says, "That's wrong. It needs to be 12 inches away." I started laughing and joking, saying something along the lines of, "Ha ha, you got me there," only to turn back to him looking upset and confused. I asked him if he was good, and he said, "You're a month in, and this is very important. You shouldn't be getting this wrong. You have to be 12 inches away, not a foot." I stared at him in disbelief for at least 20 seconds, trying to figure out if he was joking or not. He wasn't. Had to have a very awkward conversation afterwards where I explained that 12 inches and a foot were the same distance. This coworker was notorious for deflecting responsibility and refusing to admit when he was wrong, so he ended it with, "Well, I guess if you want to think of it that way." I've got a few more similar stories about the guy. Luckily, he wasn't my boss, just a coworker that got stuck training me for a while. He somehow lasted well over a year and a half after that before getting fired back in April. By that time, I'd been promoted and no longer worked in the same department as him. And in a strange way, I do miss him sometimes. He certainly was a personality. I guess, quote unquote, 12 inches just sounds more official. Is that how it works out? Story 6. My brother told me I needed to request off the weekend. It was Thursday because he was getting married. When I told him I needed at least a month's notice to request time off, he told me to just quit my job. He hasn't spoken to me in a month because his, I guess then, fiance didn't like me and thought I was trying to steal my brother from her. My boss was understanding since I had been a model employee for the last few years. I got the weekend off. On Saturday morning, I saw my brother and asked him if he was sure he wanted to go through with it. He told me I was no longer invited to the wedding. They were divorced within the year. Story 7. I worked as a supervisor for a travel agency that specializes in cruises. If you booked a cruise online through a 1-800 number that wasn't the cruise line directly, we probably handled your vacation. Lady had called in during the life of the booking and managed to witch her way to some free onboard credit and a birthday celebration for her husband on my company's dime. While the cruise line messed up and did the decorations a day too early, she called from the ship via guest relations to witch at us about it. One of the complaints was that the decorations were ugly. They were basically glorified Party City decorations, but done in that cruise line branding. She demanded it be fixed. I thought she was only talking about them being up too early. I told her I could ask the cruise line to put them up the next day instead. She then asked how I was going to fix the other part. I was confused at first about what she was asking. She then proceeded to start all over about the ugliness of the decorations. I straight up asked her how she would like me to get her new decorations that didn't involve a helicopter or me swimming out to the ship. After that, she finally let me get off the line, sent an email to the rest of the supervisor team saying that the woman gets zero comp or refunds ever again. Story 8. Was in an informal meeting with someone that I was doing a project with. We were both self-employed and in the same industry, so our meetings were a lot more casual than a regular office context. He, a healthy, active, early 60-something, starts talking jokingly about his imminent demise and passing with me and the client. Now, he's got an odd sense of humor and often jokes about strange stuff, so I smiled and laughed politely. He and the client stop and look at me and say, "Oh, we haven't told you." My heart sinks as they share that he has been having strange aphasic episodes, that it's getting worse, and they think he has a couple of years left. And I'm just a deer in headlights at this point. The meeting quickly ends and I leave, feeling horrible. That was about 6 years ago. He was able to get a diagnosis of a rare form of epilepsy, got on medication, and to my knowledge hasn't had an episode or a seizure since. Still makes weird jokes, though. Story 9. I used to deliver pizza. People all the time would be like, "Oh, you took more than 30 to 45 minutes. I can have this for free, right?" I think most of the time they were joking, but also half hoping I would say yes. Anyway, we were a small family-owned pizzeria, and we didn't do that. One day it was super busy, and I took a few deliveries at the same time. One of the deliveries was farther than I thought we even delivered. Since it was so far out, I went to that one last. It was a hotel. Hotels and apartments usually suck trying to find where to deliver. So I tried calling and this guy didn't answer. Finally, I got directions to the guy from the front desk. This tacked on probably an extra 10 minutes at least. So I get there and this guy was demanding to get his pizza for free because it took so long. I just kind of chuckled because I always play to the side that people were joking. He told me he waited over an hour and a half for his pizza. I know I didn't take that long to deliver it. So I lightly said, "Oh, I don't believe that." He looked at me with the most serious look on his face and almost started yelling at me that he waited over an hour and a half and that it was outrageous. When I saw he was serious, I apologized for the untimely delivery. He said something like, "You aren't sorry, you're just sad you didn't believe me." I told him it was a common joke people made when pizza took a little extra time and agreed with him that the delivery time was outrageous and didn't reflect our usual business. I didn't get a tip on that delivery, and I felt bad for how I treated the guy and that his pizza was very late. When I got back to the pizzeria, I asked about the delivery and was told that we don't deliver that far anyway, but a new employee had just gone and accepted the order, so we honored it. But the other delivery drivers just didn't even bother to take it because it was so far out, so it was neglected until my boss saw and was like, "Hey, you need to take this delivery." Story 10. I've had a substance issue since I was a teenager. My boss knows about it because I've worked for her for almost 7 years and have been in and out of rehab. She's been great to make sure I still have a job every time I come back. It makes me miserable all the time, so she decided to make light of it one day a couple of years ago, so we started joking around about it. If I was a few minutes late, she'd ask me if she was needed to kick my dealer's back for taking so long to get my pills to me. If I clumsily did something, she'd ask if it's because I was spiked or because I needed to get spiked. It really helped me feel more comfortable and stay honest with her when I'm struggling. So one day I came in after going on a huge binge, and because I'd gotten so messed up, I didn't realize I'd missed a shift. Straight up, no call, no show, the only time I've done that. She approached me with a wicked glare on her face and told me if I didn't get my back into rehab and take it seriously this time, she was going to fire me. I laughed at first, but it didn't take any more than 2 seconds to realize she wasn't playing around this time. I was in rehab for a month and stayed clean for 5 months after that. Story 11. Being made homeless by my bio dad at 16 on April Fool's Day. I came downstairs to get something to eat before heading out, and he told me he needed to talk to me, which was never a good sign. So I sat down and he started talking about my quote-unquote bad behavior. He went on a little rant about how I'm not helping myself because of it, because I have depression, and he thought my room being messy was the thing that made me depressed. Then he drops the bomb and says, "We aren't sure if we want you to keep living here anymore." Now, me being 16 and knowing my stepmom, who wasn't in the room, couldn't keep a straight face to save her life, I assumed he was joking and said, "Oh, dang you almost got me. Ha, happy April Fool's Day, Dad," and went to stand up. But he put a hand on my shoulder and told me he wasn't joking, and he wanted to know why I skipped a theater rehearsal. I'd already told him. I had a massive panic attack because our piece was about depression and it was a lot for me. So, yeah, that was my quite literal, "Oh, you're not joking" moment. On the plus side, him kicking me out meant I got to escape poverty for a couple of years since we were living right on the poverty line, and my friends' parents that took me in were solidly middle class. They bought me my first pair of good shoes, and I cried when my foster dad handed me the 60 pounds to go buy them, because I'd never held that much money before, aside from a couple of birthdays when I was younger. He gave me a hug after that and gave me more money so I could go out with some friends after school. I think that was the day he realized just how poor I'd been before then, and he always made sure I had enough money every day to eat and get the bus and have fun afterward, and made sure I knew I was always welcome at their home and made me feel so loved and appreciated. Story 12. About 20 years ago, I, 25M at the time, cross-dressed as a cheerleader for Halloween at the high school I taught at. I had an official uniform, which had a shockingly short skirt, blonde wig, tights through which you could see my leg hair, and the fellow teacher did a bang-up job on my makeup, but I kept my goatee since I didn't actually want to pass as a female. All of my students loved it, and some teachers even brought their classes on a short field trip to look through my window. A student photographer came by and my costume was immortalized in the yearbook. The next day, a fellow older male teacher came by and said, "Adam, can I talk to you about your costume?" I grinned, having gotten a bunch of compliments about it. He continued, "You know, in the Bible, there are 3 things you should never do. One of them is dressing up as a woman." I continued grinning, although it was a weird joke to make, though admittedly this teacher wasn't known for his fun personality. Okay, I stammered, my grin faltering just a little bit. He nodded solemnly and left the room, then it dawned on me. He wasn't joking. Story 13. I could write a lot of details about this, but I'll try to keep it short. I once shared an office with a guy who always talked in circles and very rarely was anything he said to be taken literally, almost always figuratively. His last name started with a G, so I'll call him G. He was very much into a guru from India called Baba. There was another guy who worked there in a different office that no one liked. He was very rude and condescending. He was a brilliant nuclear physicist, and he was always getting into arguments with others who worked there. His last name started with an L, so I'll call him L. Also, L weighed over 400 pounds. I was sitting at my desk when G went to leave the office. He opened the door, stopped, and then turned back towards me, called my name, and said, L is suffering. I thought he meant because L had no friends and no spiritual awareness or little empathy for others or whatever. I just assumed G was talking figuratively again. It just seemed weird that he would suddenly stop at the door to tell me that. Then G turned back to the hallway and asked if anyone had called 911 yet. That's when it hit me that he was actually being literal in this case. I went to the door and saw L in the hallway with a bunch of students gathered around him. I remember the first responders had a hard time getting him on the gurney because of his weight. We heard later that day that L passed away on the way to the hospital. Story 14. Years ago, 20 plus, yes, I'm old, I was driving several of my friends around, including two that had recently started dating. It was kind of a ladies' man that went through girlfriends, especially younger ones, constantly. She was a freak that came from very conservative parents. I knew him better since high school, but they were both good friends. Neither were what I would call ready to settle down. During the drive, they revealed they were engaged and they wanted me to be the best man. I honestly laughed, then I saw in the mirror that they were serious. I felt bad, but I agreed to do it. The ceremony was very fancy and nice, and I did the best I could. From what I've heard, the recording of my toast was actually kind of funny. Fast forward several years and they ended up in a nasty divorce. By then, I discovered he'd been a cruel piece of crap for years with her and many others. Several years after that, after I'd cut him off completely, I was horrified, though not surprised, to be told he'd ended his latest girlfriend, then ended himself. I'm never going to live down that he had fooled me for so long. If I could go back, I'd tell her to get the hell away from him and warn anyone I could that he was toxic as heck. Now I just consider it a lesson learned and I'll help anyone I can if they're in a similar situation. Story 15. During the height of the lockdown, I needed a new health card, but they weren't accepting people to come get their picture taken. So the person on the phone from the government sent me a blank card, no photo, with my info on it. A year later, I went to the government office to get my photo taken and was issued a new health card. Woman at the government office looks at the health card, taps the place where my picture should be on the card. This isn't you. Me. Ha, yeah, I know. Her, sarcastically, are you over 80? Me, lol. Starts getting out my identification papers. I'm 40. Her, I said this isn't you. Turns out she had never seen a health card like that from a Canadian citizen like myself at my age before. Her coworker looked at the health card and back at me like, are you printing these out of your garage? She called someone on the phone. Yeah, she says she got it on the phone from the government. Yeah, I don't know what this is, who she says she is. Then she eyes my official employment IDs from a college I work for. Basically, they made me go to another office where the person there had to wait on the phone for 20 minutes to figure out I'm a legit person, which felt very confusing. Story 16. It was when I met up with an online friend for the first time. It was surprisingly more fun than I thought it would be. By the end of the night, as we were waiting to get served at a restaurant, she looked at me and asked how I thought our outing went. I told her that I had a great time, but that didn't seem to do it for her. She proceeded to tell me about how she does this thing at the end of every outing with her friends where she rates and gives feedback on how well it went, what didn't go so well, and what we could do with some improvement for the next time. I laughed it off thinking she was joking. It felt all too robotic and school-like for me to actually take seriously, but she definitely was serious. I told her to go first so I could get an idea of what she wanted, and I kid you not, she whipped out her phone and started drafting up multiple paragraphs for about 7 minutes or so. I felt so awkward because it was also 7 minutes of pure silence and deep concentration. Thankfully, I had to leave midway because I was needed elsewhere. I told her to just text me her thoughts when she was done, but she insisted that that wasn't the way to do it, and it had to be done in person. I still can't believe this is something her and her friends regularly do. Story 17. I had a friend and classmate that's a bit of a compulsive liar who would make up outrageous stuff stemming from a habit of CYA due to strict parents growing up. For example, a Lambo tried to race me when the dude didn't even have his own car and his parents rarely let him drive their Corolla. But he's good people otherwise, so I learned early on in our friendship to take things he said with a grain of salt. Then one day, he said he inherited his grandfather's GTO and needed me to help him drive it home since I knew how to drive a stick and he didn't. Although I knew his grandpa had one, I laughed it off until he FaceTimed me at his grandpa's house, holding the keys to an almost museum-quality red 1967 Pontiac GTO convertible in the garage. Sure, I needed to take some minor repairs to get it to work since we estimated it's been a few years, but it ran well after that. He initially was thinking about selling it, but he wanted to take it when we hung out over the next few weeks, and I also helped him find a driving school that was able to teach stick. We both agreed that a proper school was better than grinding the gears of a classic car, not to mention the only other friend he knew that drove stick didn't want to gamble with his then 2011 Camaro. I even begged my boss for overtime to afford it since he wanted a dirt cheap price and I was only $2,000 short. But my friend's uncle talked him into selling it to him. I've always wanted a GTO since. Story 18. Warning, wordy with very little payoff. I used to be a cameraman for a news network, and one summer we had a 3-day-long production shooting a sports event. At the end of the first day, us tech crew had to tear down the set and prepare for day 2 while the producers got to leave. I had some history with one of those producers, and they made it very clear to me in the past that they did not like working with me. At the time, it was due to inexperience. Once we were done prepping for the next day, we began walking back to the parking lot, but a golf cart driver offered to drive us. On the way back, we passed that one producer who was still walking. I didn't see them, it was dark out. A few minutes later, I received a call from the producer who didn't like me. Producer: Minivan, did you just get a ride on a golf cart? Me: huh, yeah. Silence. Me: are you still walking? They're probably heading back your way if you need a ride. Producer: I still can't believe you said ha. Me: I know, right? But hey, walking is good exercise. Producer: I can't believe you right now. Me: oh, are you being serious or joking right now? Producer: click. They were serious. I tried to call back, no answer, left a voicemail, sent a text, no response. I saw them the next day and I went to apologize. Me: I'm really sorry. I really didn't mean to upset you. I was just kidding around. Producer: I can't talk to you right now. Grabs clipboard, walks away. And then I had to walk on eggshells around this person for the duration of a heavily sponsored live TV production. In a weird twist of fate, the producer tripped over a cable during a commercial break and was barreling towards my camera. I stepped in and caught them before they face planted. I received the most reluctant thank you of my life afterwards. Story 19. Started a new job with a new manager I later realized was totally incompetent and unethical, fabricating statistics on internal reports and taking credit for all my work, and possibly mentally ill. We were driving to a site and having a friendly chat about random stuff, and somehow we got onto the topic of motorcycle clubs, and I mentioned that some clubs have different chapters in different areas. He says he has no affiliation with any club and doesn't know anyone in a club, but swears up and down that groups of motorcycle riders are called regiments because motorcycle clubs were invented by returning servicemen from the Air Force where they have regiments. I found that super interesting and Googled it, but that wasn't correct. They are called chapters. I showed him and he still insisted they are called regiments. I let it go. I didn't really care and didn't discuss it further. He pouted the rest of the drive. Like 5 hours later, this guy calls me to his office, shuts the door, and tells me he didn't hire me to tell him how it is and not ever to correct him. I was so shocked I genuinely thought he was joking and made the mistake of laughing. I realized he was pretty quick. The dude had been stewing on it for all that time and screamed at me for like a legit 20 minutes. His face went all red, said I needed to, quote, respect the chair. The correct answer is whatever he says it is, called me a know-it-all, on and on and on. I'd been there less than a week, and his favorite phrase was, your job is to make me look good. Do not miss that guy, not at all. Story 20. I still remember this girl to this day, although it was a while ago. We were working on a packet for an easy day in class. One of the questions was, if you had 500 pennies, how many dollars would you have? We were a group of 4 working on it, and she said confidently, $50. I thought she was joking, so I told my other friend, yeah, write that down, and everyone let out a chuckle except her. She then said, why did you write down $5? I responded that I wanted to get a good grade on this assignment. I still thought she was joking, but she started arguing with me about why I was wrong. As soon as the class was over, I laughed so hard I almost cried. Yeah, that's the kind of math that gets you rich in Monopoly money, you know? Story 21. A guy I worked with, one of the most straight-laced people who always had his crap together and was super against substance use. He was a relatively new hire, dressed to the nines, rose up the leadership structure very fast, metrics off the charts, great person to work with. We worked with a bunch of younger folks, so the topic of substances would come up now and then, or even alcohol. He didn't even like people talking about that in front of him. He was never a schmuck about it, would just leave the room. If you ask, he'd explain that he was just not into the whole substance scene. Anyway, one day the two of us got to talking in the parking lot as we were heading home for the night. I brought up something I was going to have to deal with when I got home. I don't remember what. There was a lot I was dealing with at the time. Anyway, he said something along the lines of, yeah, I went through something similar when I was homeless and making troubles myself to get my fix. I laughed really loud because how funny that someone like him would even say such a thing. His teeth were perfect after all. He had the most dejected and hurt look on his face. He had just confided something in me and was being very serious, and I laughed in his face. I apologized and we're still good friends even after I left the company, but I'll never forget this interaction. I also realized that his teeth were actually too perfect, and now I think they probably aren't his real teeth. Story 22. Was working as a dental assistant and had a new manager. Well, every morning we have to prepare rooms and materials for the first set of patients. We also would have a small team meeting just to go over the schedule and I guess boost morale. Well, there was a particularly dirty piece of equipment someone hadn't cleaned at the end of the day before, so I asked the dentist nearby if it's being used and needs to be cleaned. He tells me yes, so I start cleaning. The new manager walks in and then proceeds to yell at me, saying to stop cleaning and go to the meeting room. I update him and he says, I don't care what that idiot said, you have to be in the meeting room because I said so or you're fired. Stared at him for a solid minute before I realized he was serious. Luckily, I had a secondary job, so I just said, cool, good luck today. Told a coworker and the dentist what happened and that I wasn't going to deal with it. Come to find out, he fired 3 other people and 6 quit, all people who had been there for years and made the dentist loads. New manager was fired soon after, and they even asked a bunch of us to come back. Only one person returned. Story 23. I'm a gay man, and I had this new male coworker who had moved to my town from a city 8 hours away. He didn't have people to hang out with yet, so my coworkers and I invited him to come hang out with us outside of work. We would all go to my apartment, have drinks, and party, and he seemed to be really enjoying hanging out with us and appreciative that we let him in our group. Then one day at work, we were all having this serious conversation about genders or something along those lines. Then he says to me, yeah, man, I just feel so sorry for you. Thinking he meant that he felt sorry for me going through needing to come to terms with being gay, I told him, oh, don't worry about it, I'm all right. His response, nah, man, I feel sorry for you because you're going to hell, man, it sucks. I laugh, thinking it's a joke. The third person in the conversation laughs a little too, but this guy's expression doesn't change. Then he adds, I'm serious, bro, it's a sin. You're such a chill guy and I got love for you, but you're going to hell, bro. I just left the room incredibly uncomfortable. Never talked to that guy again. He got fired a few weeks later for stealing money from his own cash register. Story 24. I was working as a clerk in my county government, and this man, who I later found out was a county commissioner, was hitting on me extremely obviously. Like, he straight up said, it's 9 inches, by the way, in the middle of a sentence. Then he basically told me that we should hang out and suggested that he could get me a better job in the government if I gave him a whistle. I thought maybe naively that it was an extremely poor, inappropriate, gross attempt at flirting, but no. He was 100% serious, gave me his number, told me to think about it. What really angered me off, though, was I talked to a supervisor about his behavior and she was basically like, oh, he's like that sometimes, and wouldn't get someone to cover for me the next time this guy came in. He wanted for me to be available and let people go ahead of him. Story 25. So when I was about 16, I had a long-distance girlfriend who had really bad relationship with her mom. Not just the usual teenage, I hate you, mom stuff. Her mom was really horrible to her in a lot of ways. One day she phoned me rather than messaging, unusual but not that weird. I asked how she was and she replied, well, my mom's gone in a really nonchalant way, like it was a minor inconvenience because of the tone of her voice, and since she was always saying bad things about her mom and had a dark sense of humor, I therefore took this to be a joke and gave a small, slightly awkward laugh. Nope, not a joke. Her mom had literally passed away in the night, and when she told me I had laughed, there had been no warning and she hadn't been particularly ill, although she was severely obese, so was never exactly in good health. It was very awkward and I felt like a total a-hole, but she eventually saw the funny side and even told people the story as a funny anecdote. The relationship didn't last much longer, but the laughing at mom thing wasn't even part of the reason we split up. Story 26. I was working on an assembly line building seats for cars. I was loading up a box of side airbags, went to cut the top off the box, was following all the proper safety procedures, cutting away from me, using a safety box cutter, holding the box in place well away from where I was cutting, etc. The box cutter caught on something in the box. I don't know if it was a chunk of plastic or a flaw in the box or what, but it twisted nearly 90 degrees. And instead of cutting away from me and towards the rack I was loading, suddenly it jumped out of the cardboard and because of the pressure needed to keep the blade extended, flew towards my offhand. I let go instantly but was still too slow. The box cutter went flying and I screamed out, crap, at the top of my lungs. My manager, who was standing not 10 feet from me, whipped around, saw me gripping my hand but calm and no wound, so he smiled and said, you're joking, right? I moved my hand away for half a second and stuff started pouring out before I clamped down again. No boss, I'm not joking. Ended up with 11 stitches in 2 layers, an inch in pretty much any direction, and I'd been in serious trouble. Story 27. I was in school on April 1st when I was younger, and then the deputy head came in and asked to take me out of class, and at my school, she never pulled you out for anything unless you were in some deep trouble. But I thought the teachers were in on some sort of April Fool's prank. I was like 7, okay? Then she sat me down in her office and straight up told me, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your granddad has just passed away. And she just stared at me for a while. Whilst I was even sad because I thought it was a messed up joke. Then my mom walked in crying and I was like, oh, you aren't joking? So, yeah. Story 28. Went on a night out with husband, BF at the time, his brother and brother's GF. It was common knowledge me and the brother did not get on. I was vocal about how much of a schmuck he was to his GF, and we actually near came to blows that night when he called her something hurtful. Can't remember what. GF was also one of my best friends at the time. I called her the next day for a chat and she was really off. I asked what was wrong and she said, you know what? After some further coaxing, she asked me why I had been coming on to the brother. I laughed a lot. She didn't. Apparently, he had said this to her to try and make her jealous, ruin our friendship. Husband also laughed immediately. It took some convincing for the GF to realize that he was full of crap. They stayed together maybe another year. The whole relationship was a mess. I hope she's doing better, and we no longer speak to her brother either because he never stopped being a schmuck. Story 29. I worked at a beach resort when I was younger. Every year, from June to July, there was an occasional nuisance invasion of seaweed. It was harmless, but it would come in on the tide and pile up on the beach in clumps about 6 inches high or so. The thing is, there is not a dang thing you can do about it. The city would send out tractors with huge rakes and pile it up, but it was largely a lost cause because the tide would just bring in more. Sometimes it would disappear for a week and then reappear. One of the guests at the resort was complaining about it at the front desk, and I explained that there's nothing anybody can do. He said he was going to do something about it, though. I laughed it off. About an hour later, he comes walking through the lobby with a yard rake he just purchased. That guy went down in the sweltering heat and started raking an entire shoreline in front of the resort. He was there for hours, almost until the sun went down, raking the seaweed into huge piles. The next morning, I arrived early to work to see that the huge piles had been completely erased by the tides that night. But not to worry, a fresh new delivery of seaweed was brought in as if the rake guy had never even been there before. Story 30. Had a guy order a dirty chai latte from me and then couldn't figure out why it was so expensive. He asks me what the extra charge is that I put on, and I said it's the espresso shot. $1 for each shot now, thank you inflation. The man says, no, I didn't ask for espresso. I asked for a dirty chai, like extra chai. I'm not paying this much. It really concerns me when people legitimately don't know what they've been ingesting. Had a lady order a grande cafe latte. I repeat back, all right, 1 grande hot latte, gonna be $5.15. And the lady says, no, I ordered a cafe latte, to which I just kind of blinked and said they're the same thing. She says, no, you're wrong. One has espresso and the other is just steamed milk. I want espresso. I tell her we don't serve just steamed milk. That's not really a thing. And she's a little confused by this and says, well, maybe that's a breve then, the one without espresso. I just nodded and said, yeah, maybe. I overheard her asking the barista making her drink what a breve was, and to be fair, I can't imagine how awful a cup of just hot milk would be, lol. Story 31. Had a lady at a grocery store tell me my son looked nothing like me. He is a carbon copy of his father. I have brown hair and green eyes, and I'm tan because I'm mixed and he's super pale with blue eyes and blonde hair. I get that comment a lot, so I laughed it off and was like, yeah, I carry him for 9 months and he looks like his dad, lol. She then told me it was odd and suspicious. I still thought she was joking because I get comments like this all the time. So I go back shopping and minding my own business, and not even 5 minutes later, she comes around with the security guard saying that this baby wasn't mine. Luckily, he didn't believe her, but I did have to show him the photo of me holding him after I literally gave birth. He let me leave and apologize, and he walked away with the lady as she was still telling him that I stole that baby, and she couldn't have had that white baby, and we need to call CPS right away. I didn't see her the rest of the time I shopped, and I also don't know what happened to her, but man, I did not think that was gonna actually happen, LMAO. And if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. And if you're liking these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. I'll catch you in that video, and thanks for watching.